Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grace at the Table. We are so happy to have you join us for our next installment in our panel discussion series on kingdom and culture, where we hope to take topics we encounter in our daily lives and current culture and interpret and analyze them through Scripture in light of God's kingdom. We hope that you'll join us by interacting on today's topic by texting in your comments and questions live for us to interact with. The text number is 443-499-2611 and will be on your screen if you need to reference it later. All questions are sent to us completely anonymous, so feel free to ask any question, no matter how crazy or embarrassing it may seem, because we will never know it was you. We really want these times to be as interactive and helpful as possible for those watching, so please send in any questions you might have for us to add to our discussion. We are very excited to dig into this new topic with you all, so let's get started. All right, so welcome back to Grace at the Table. We have a special Wednesday edition we're doing today, where we're going to have a slightly different version of a conversation, because we wanted to make sure that we took the chance to have a panel discussion on the experience of being single and not just sit down and talk more theoretically and biblically only. And we want to make sure we heard from people that are actually living that out or have lived that out. So today we have a different set of panelists. We have three people up here that we don't always have up here. And instead of me introducing them, I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves to you so that we know who we're talking with. So if you're willing to start, just briefly who you are and kind of why you're up here.
So I'm Greg. I'm one of the pastors here at Grace Community Church. And I was married for almost 44 years. And my wife had brain cancer, and she passed away in January. So I've been about 7 months now as a single. And so the reality is many of us who are married will probably face that in their future, a season of being single. So I'm on the panel for that.
Yeah, that's great.
Hi, my name is Becky Fox. I work here.
Oh, did it go off? No, you're good. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Becky Fox. I am the office manager here at Grace Community Church. I am a single woman in my 50s, so a lot of experience there.
Hi, my name is Charlie Clippadlow, and I'm on staff with Crew, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ in the Baltimore metropolitan area. And I had the privilege of working with Eric and Kylie for several years on our staff team until they came to join the staff of the church here.
Yeah.
And I am single, but I was single until I was 61 years old. And I know you're saying, oh God, not me. But I hope for those who are single that, you never know what age God will bring someone into your life. And I've been married just about 3 years now, this summer.
That's great. And I don't know, I never usually introduce myself, but since this is a different kind of panel and I'm going to try to share a little bit more, for anyone who doesn't know by now, I'm Lisa. And my experience with this is just that I've never been married. I'm just the youngest person that's up here today. So I'm going to make a humble attempt to represent the young single folk. That's what I'm going to attempt to do, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So we're going to dig right in. We've got a couple questions, and also, reminder, obviously we mentioned it in the intro, but feel free to text in questions. If you guys have anything that you would like to ask these panelists, we are still taking your questions live, even though it is a Wednesday. So feel free to let us know what you want to hear. For our first question, in what ways have you found the church community to be helpful in your experience with singleness? Whoever wants to go. Doesn't even matter. Just jump right in.
So I've been the shortest on this. So. My experience has been very good. I already have a lot of established relationships here. I've known a lot of people, and so I have a lot of friends. I wasn't sure how that would go when I no longer had my wife with me. Many of my friends were married, and so I've been encouraged and pleasantly surprised that they continue to include me in on situations. The small group that I'm a part of have a couple single women as well, and so they're accustomed to having some single people there. When I do some activities with the church, I regularly have a couple of the men that I've had friendships with. They'll come and hang out with me even if their spouses don't come, and so so far I felt like I do have friends and I feel supported by them. just in appropriate ways, they'll see how I'm doing and see how things are going for me. But it's been pretty supportive for me.
Good. It's good to hear. Other thoughts? Anyone?
Well, certainly, friendship has been a great way that the church community has supported me through the years. Being involved in people's families and their homes and their lives is just a natural support to the single person. I think another way that has been particularly helpful to me as a woman is having male friends who are willing to, and most of them married, who are willing to help me out in certain ways that are very beneficial, like things around my home when things suddenly go wrong and I don't know what to do. I have friends who I can call and who have come over and done amazing things, and when I've had car issues. So that's been very helpful and very supportive. Because again, as a woman, you can feel vulnerable in some ways, and that's been helpful. Because they know what they're talking about. When I go to the mechanic, I don't feel like I'm going to get ripped off. Or when I have a person come into my home, I don't feel like I'm going to be taken advantage of because my friend's already explained what the problem is. I'm not going to be taken advantage of by a work person who, sometimes they see a woman and they just assume you don't know anything and they charge you more for things they're not really doing. So it's nice to have that kind of safety and security of somebody coming alongside you in that way.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that this first question, I think the church community is one of the key places to get the things I found most valuable in being able to walk with God as a single or a married person. I call this kind of if we were looking at the sky, it would be a constellation of stars. If you're looking at a diamond, it would be the facets of the diamond. What does it look like to have healthy circles of relationships and support? And I'll just name a few of the things. One is to be involved in a good church. That's where I think most of the other kinds of support can come from best. And beyond that, this is a fairly large church. If you came here only on Sunday, I've seen movie theaters this size. It can be fairly anonymous. So I'd recommend beyond that, getting involved in a small group or some other ministry that brings it down to a group of less than 20 or 30, maybe even down to a small group of 10. I found myself being in house churches at my other church, Grace Fellowship, and that was the most valuable experience I had. I also recommend being involved in ministry of some kind where people know you and you work with other people. And I found it very valuable to have relationships with some other people of the same gender, some other guys who could speak into my life, single and married, who then could have different perspectives. And having that circle of relationships and those different people and those outlets for keeping your walk with God strong. It's like if a star is missing, the constellation doesn't look like what it's supposed to, or if you take a facet away from a diamond, it's not really as valuable as it once was or as durable. So that's my thought, is the church is a source of some of the most important supports you can get as a single or a married person.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Other thoughts on that before we move on?
So I have kind of a funny flip side of something that would seem.
Okay.
I've appreciated that those who are married, that I've been able to see, those who are married and parents, that I've been able to see their struggles. They've been honest about struggles, or I've been there because they've allowed me to be part of their lives. I've seen their struggles. I've seen the couple that's not in agreement on something, and they're really struggling through that and trying to work through that, but it's not easy. And I've seen, the exhausted, overwhelmed mom who desperately wants a shower is her top priority of the day. And that's been helpful because it's taken the rose-colored glasses off marriage. It's helped me to see that grass is not greener on that side. It's just different grass. It can look like it's better, but it's not necessarily. It's not without its hardships.
Yeah, that's a good point.
My wife and I were married pretty young, pretty early in our lives, and I would say for the first 10 years, most of those years we had a single or singles live with us, and so we've maintained contact with a number of those people, but we're talking a generation has gone. All their they eventually got married. They had kids. Their kids are grown and their kids are out now.
Yeah, yeah.
But they've made a special point to reach out even recently just to let us know how that was a shaping influence on how they their married life and how they raise their kids. So that was a great opportunity for us to to have them as part of our family and to to disciple those lives.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So on the flip side of kind of the same coin, because obviously we're talking right now about things that the church has done well that's been really helpful and supportive for singles, we also have to recognize that not everything that's ever happened has always been really successful or helpful or beneficial for people in that season. So for people in this church and anyone else that's listening, how could they do a better job supporting singles, or what types of things have you guys experienced that were maybe not the most helpful, especially from the Christian community? I won't limit it just to this church, but the Christian community at large, that were not helpful to you either as a single or in your experience dealing with singleness. Because I'm sure there are things, sadly, I'm sure there are things, but...
I won't always start, by the way. But, I mean, I think that it's easy for parents and couples to get pretty well focused in on their own lives and their own struggles or their own responsibilities. And, those singles, maybe they don't have a network yet, or maybe that hasn't, their church doesn't have a singles population, and so... I think that we can think as couples, we're doing a good job because we remember, at the holiday or Christmas to ask them to come and join us or something like that, which I think is one thing we could do. But there's lots of lonely nights and Fridays and Saturdays, and their options are limited. They don't feel like they can just necessarily head out to certain places, to hang out, and stuff like that. So I think it's easy just to kind of be focused on your own things and not be aware of where singles, you can continue to include them or serve them in various ways, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, at least from my perspective, it's very challenging to maybe still feel like you're still fully a part of everything that's going on, because especially in a church like this, there's so many families, and so many families, especially with kids, which is great. It's not a bad thing. But if you're not a part of the majority, you're kind of this weird minority that people are aware is there, but they're not super focused on. And so it's known like that you're a single person, but I think the attention can feel like it's really focused in on families or married couples and children. And not necessarily in a way where it's said that that's more important. But I think when all the focus is put there, it's hard not to feel like that's what's being told is more important. And I don't think I'm not valuable as a member of the church or as another believer, just as a person, simply because I'm not paired off with somebody. But I think it's hard to feel like you know where home is in community like that, at least for me. Because for example, I can come in here, some people come in, they come in with their families, they're putting their kids in the back, they're doing all this stuff, and they're milling around talking to other people that are in their season. If there's not as many singles in here, that's really hard to do on a Sunday, and it's harder to connect if people are just looking for people that are exactly where they are. So I think it's sometimes felt lonely in ways that maybe I'm not always sure if it needed to feel lonely. I don't think it's a good idea to lean on singles ministries exclusively to make sure that single people feel cared for. Because you may or may not have that at your church, but if you do, that's just one place that happens where they can kind of gather, but there's so much more life that happens in the church and in my life that's not taking place in singles ministry. And it sometimes can kind of feel like people don't really care about that. Like they don't want to be a part of that, or they're not invested in what happens when I leave this building. And on the along those same lines of thinking, I feel like some of the times that I was highlighted, it was because I'm single and therefore I should be serving, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying like I don't want to serve because I'm a grumpy single and I want to do my own thing. What I mean is I'm more than a workhorse just because I have time, I think is more probably what I'm going for there. Because I think there have been times where it felt like that was what singles were good for in the life of the church, that you're just there to support families or other people. You know, you're just there for ministry. And I am, but not so simplistically. I kind of live my ministry through my job and my workplace and the other things that I go do as a single person. And yes, I'm sure they're different than people who are married and have kids. But I don't think they're less valuable, and I don't think they're less helpful for like my witness and the things that I'm a part of. So I think sometimes it feels like that's pushed to the side, like that's not important to people. And I don't know that I often even have people ask me about any of that. Like people don't even really talk to you about it. So it feels sometimes like people aren't that interested, I think, for me. I'm always shocked when someone comes up and genuinely wants to know about me and not just what I do when I'm in this building or how I'm serving, because it doesn't happen that often. You know, I must not be interesting because I'm single. I don't have kids that like scream and, you know, a grumpy spouse or whatever. So I must not be very compelling. But I think we still have just as much stuff going on because we're just people. And I feel like it would be nice to be seen more as a fellow human and not just like a single human. But feel free to add additional thoughts to that.
Yeah, I would say one of my biggest struggles with the church community at large, not just here at Grace Community, but at large, is the way that womanhood is defined so often by the roles of wife and mother. And yes, that's a large part of womanhood. But that is not the only part of womanhood.
Yeah.
Yet I think it's often the only thing that's preached about or is even commended at times. So being commended as a single woman, I was often commended for the way that I mothered or the way that I served families. And that's a good thing. My heart would be to be mothering.
Yeah.
But
there's more to Becky.
There's more to me than that.
Yeah.
And when you're a single person, a single woman, and that's how you're told your womanhood is defined,
Yeah.
when you don't have those roles ever come about yet, and for me, motherhood may never come, then it sets you up to be very disappointed and angry at God.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a lot of women in the Bible who it wasn't their role as wife or mom that was the reason God used them. For some of them it was.
Yeah.
But many, it was about their character, other aspects of their character. And so I would love to see some of that highlighted as we talk about biblical womanhood.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good.
I think that also some churches, not intentionally, I'm sure, but it often can make single people feel marginalized or as if they're incomplete people in waiting to be completed when they find someone and get married. And I think it's important for churches to recognize there might be single people in the audience with the verbiage that's used, the activities that are sponsored, or even when it comes to ministries, inviting qualified single people into leadership, not just as in the entry level, but have people be visible in the church that are qualified, godly single people who can serve leadership in ministries.
Yeah.
As far as helping singles in a bigger, broader sense, a lot of churches don't have a lot of singles, especially over 30 or 35 years of age. And I think it might be helpful if the churches in the area knew what was happening with other churches close by to see if they could network some of the people together for social events or for retreats or Bible studies or other things, service opportunities where they might get that time with other singles, where you don't exclusively get that from a singles group, but maybe there's only 5 or 10 in one church, maybe there's 20 or 30 in another, and they can get together.
Yeah, I think that's good also to realize that singles would not exclusively be interested in that because they're looking to find a spouse. You might just be genuinely interested in hanging out with other people that understand your season and where you're coming from. It's not because you're hunting. I mean, maybe you are, and that's fine, whatever. But if you're not, you would still want to hang out with other people that are in your season, that understand where you're coming from.
And who have the same freedom you do
Yeah.
in your single life. You don't have to go home at 10:30.
Yeah, exactly, you don't. And when I'm looking for people that I can hang out with, most of my friends are married and probably have kids at this point. Most of them have kids. So it's not that I don't want their companionship and their friendship. It's just they are not as available to spend time with me in any capacity, because they are not as free to move about, because they have other people in their life that they are committed to that they need to account for. And I understand that. It's not that I'm like, oh, well, you shouldn't. You should just do whatever. I get that that is a thing, and I think that's a real thing that should be considered. But it's out of balance if you're really looking at it properly for what I'm capable of doing to what they're capable of putting forward in many cases. And not a problem, because I've gone to the grocery store with people with their kids because I'm like, I just want to be with you. I don't need to be doing something amazing. We don't need to go to the winery, and have a cheese plate. I just want to spend time with you. And if that's running errands, that's fine with me. I think you can still enjoy that time. But it's different. There is a piece of me as a single, if I've got more time, maybe more financial resources, different availability like that, maybe I wish I had somebody I could go travel with or do a weekend trip that also doesn't have to account for somebody back home to make sure that they're free to go do that. And you can't do that always with your married friends. So I think there's a real place for making sure that singles have community with other singles, but not just to try to get married. There's more to it than that. I think that sense of community, it's nice to be around people that understand and have some of that same availability that you do. But other thoughts before we move on to another question? No? What are some of the joys and sorrows you experience in your singleness?
So I'm going to dovetail off of what you just said.
Okay, go for it.
So my whole life has been about paying attention to times and schedules and pinching pennies, to make sure that, kids had what they needed and those things, to get everybody home on time, get everybody up on time, need to leave a meeting and so forth. So for me, I'm in a season now and in a situation now with being single where I can really drop things and like you said, it's 10 o'clock and this conversation's going well and I don't have to leave the meeting.
Yep.
I'm hanging out as long as it's interesting and we're not falling asleep, And I have flexibility in my schedule so that I can sleep in if I want to sleep in. I don't have anybody that has to be fed at a certain time or get on a bus or any of those kind of things.
Yeah.
And and I have more time for relationships that I as a married person, it was always like, we really need to get together. We really need to get together. And we were always saying that to each other, and we never got together. So it's not like these married people are getting together with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because they don't.
Yeah.
But now I'm intentionally saying I'm going to say yes to a lot more relationship time with people. And so there is a freedom, and there's maybe even some financial means, and that I don't remember ever having that. And like you said, taking a trip or something like that, I found out Southwest had a 50% off, and I booked 3 flights, to go see some family and some other things.
Yep.
And someone said, "Hey, do you want to go on a cross-country trip?" And I said, "Yeah, let's figure that out." You can just
decide the answers, yes.
I didn't have that. I've never had that. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because it's nice to be able to just kind of make that decision and jump into that stuff. But on the flip side of that, because that would be a joy of it, that you have all of that to you. But one of the sorrows, I think, for me is that it can still be extremely lonely. And even, I'm a very introverted person, so I spend plenty of time by myself, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't feel like I need to be with everybody all the time. But even having said that, I think many things in life, we are still a relational people. I think that's how people are designed. Varying degrees of how much you want to be with them, but I think everyone still wants to be connected to people in some way. And there are points where it is genuinely lonely because maybe you have the means to do all that stuff, but if you're like me, those things are all enhanced by company, or good company in many cases, not just another breathing human being, but good company at times, someone you actually want to be able to enjoy that with. And while it doesn't have to be a romantic thing, it doesn't have to be a spouse or, children or something like that to enjoy those moments, it's still tricky. It's ironic because I'm listening to you and you're going, you have time for relationships. And I'm like, you have all the time in the world. And yet at the same time, that can be the main thing that's missing that makes it feel so lonely, because it's hard to connect with people all the time. Just because you have all the availability doesn't mean that it's always easy to fill it, at least for me. Maybe I'm weird. You seem to be doing well. You're doing better than me, so I don't know. Maybe it's me.
It's been 7 months.
No, but I think that can be tricky, at least for me. I feel like that's been challenging, and sometimes you're like, well, I'd love to do this, but I don't have anybody who's actually available to do that with me, and so now I'm just kind of like, meh. It feels at times like a bit of a missed opportunity, because you have to decide, do I want to do it and do it alone, or do I want to try to wait and find somebody who could do it with me where I could like it, but then they may not be able to do that. So for me, it's more I think the lonely moments, I think, would be one of the sorrows, but yeah.
I think I agree with you. I think one of the greatest positive things about singleness would be time, and mostly the flexibility of your time. I've been able to travel to Venezuela, to Turkey, to Russia, to all over the world on mission trips that I wouldn't have had the time probably with a family. I've been able to have the flexibility to buy a house and have some godly single men live with me for several years. They paid my mortgage, and I love them for it. And they bought me a house. But the flip side, and time for ministry, time to be with people, time to be out and serve others, or just to have fun or do something spontaneously. The other side, it's a two-edged sword, is that time sometimes is when you are lonely. You feel that loneliness where you don't have someone who's a family member or a spouse or a child or someone like that to be your a little world of yours. So there's both a two-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say one of my greatest joys has been the freedom to pour myself into ministry. Because I'm single, I've spent 20-some years going to youth conference, a youth conference that I love, and that I've seen God do great things.
Yeah.
And it's been a pleasure to be a part of. Because of being single, there's many ministries here in the church I've been able to take part in ways that I wouldn't be able to if I were married and had a child or children.
Yeah.
And even in my job here at the church, and the way I've been able to pour myself out in that would not have been possible had I been married and had a family. And so that's just been a great joy, seeing the ways that God has blessed me and the ways I've been able to see God at work across many people. I think for marrieds, you get to see God at work in your family, God at work in your spouse, God at work maybe in your network of friends. But I've been privileged to see God at work in hundreds of people. And I can, on any given Sunday, I can look out across the church and I can remember, because God's blessed me with a great memory too, so I have to be grateful for that. But I remember when this happened in ministry, when God touched them in this way. And that's a great joy, an incredible joy.
Yeah.
On the sorrow side, I would say that season of life when you're in your early 20s to mid 20s to late 20s, when all your friends get married, and they go about concentrating on their marriage, and all of a sudden you feel like all your friends have deserted you.
Yeah.
That's a hard season.
Yeah.
That's a sorrowful season, to be honest.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how to, again, reestablish other friendships and relationships. And even, and those friends come back. They do eventually. Maybe not all of them, but, a good portion of them do come back. And friendship's different, but it still can be very good. But there is a season where it's kind of like, oh, I don't feel like I have any friends anymore because all my friends got married. And so, and again, there's also, for me, again, another particular sorrow is now I've seen not only my friends get married, but now their children get married. And that's been hard too. There's been sorrow about that it's, I would have longed to have been married. But God hasn't done that, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean it's not sorrowful when it's like, wait a minute, I've had this whole generation, and it still hasn't happened for me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I finished. Yeah, I would, in a different season, I would echo, there's some options that don't seem like they're gonna, things that you thought you would have, the church can't be that to you. They can't provide that for you.
Yeah.
And so that's a you and God kind of a discussion.
Yeah.
And maybe God does, bring about a relationship later on. But like you said, there's a seasons that may be past.
Yeah.
And so there were, for me, in the 2 years that Wendy had cancer, and I was kind of walking through that season, and through that season, God graciously kind of walked me through that season, and it was like, you're not going to have 5, 10, 20 more years that you thought maybe you would have had. You're not going to have that.
Yeah.
And so there is a kind of a death of a vision that can be in this season of singleness, I think. And that's real, and the church can't be that to you.
Yeah.
It can't provide that for you.
Yeah, that's probably one of the more bitter pills, that there are some things that in the season that other people or the things that are in your life, they just can't be for you. Yeah. And it sounds negative, but I think there's a piece of it, it's just a reality. That, that void is not filled in exactly the same way as if you were in a different season. Right. Not to say that all of those things would be better, because, that may not be the case, but it's not the same,
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So,
and I would even, again with that, the fact is I've reached a point in my life where I will probably never have my own biological child. Now I've had the joy of mothering many children, and so that's been just a delight. But again, there's that sorrow of I won't have my own biological child. Now that doesn't mean God may not put me in a situation with a spouse who would have children of their own or that kind of thing, and I would become a mother in that way. But I won't be again, I won't, and again, there's a sorrow in that. Now, there's also comfort from God in the ways that He's allowed me to be a mother to many.
Yeah.
And so, again, blessing in that.
Yeah.
I think also one of the greatest joys of singleness being the time is that I've been able to spend years of my time spending time discipling other young men who are now, many of them are all over the world as missionaries and church planters. Many of them are doctors or lawyers or people or just average folks that work down the street. But they're godly people who love the Lord and their families. I can see them passing on that godliness. So to see, in a sense, not children that are biological, but spiritual, younger brothers and sisters and children from the last generations that are around the world, that's a real, I would not have had the time to do that if I were married. I mean, would have done a lot less of it.
Yeah. And I think even for me, like, if you put the kid part aside, because I don't know if my brain's quite there yet, but probably will be one day, but I'm not there yet. So I think for me, one of the joys is also being able to invest in my actual career, which I feel like that doesn't probably get talked about too much. I feel like I don't get to hear as much about that for single people as I wish I did, but I enjoy that. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes I've maybe felt like, in Christian circles that over-investing in your career is kind of looked down upon, like maybe that's not what you're supposed to do because you're supposed to be serving and, in the body of the church and all that stuff. And you are, but I think you can still really press into the different places that God brings your way in the season that you're in. So if I have all that time, maybe I am able to really invest in a career. Maybe that's exactly where He has me for that season, that's a major piece of what He's doing in my life. And maybe it's not kids, but there's coworkers and other people that you get to deal with in those situations that you get to be a part of their world in a way that maybe you wouldn't be able to if you always had to say, well, as soon as work is over, I have to rush home, because I got kids, I got a spouse, I got to do all this stuff. If someone's, having a rough day in my office and they want to hang back and talk, I don't need to check with anybody to make sure that I'm available to do that, And I've been able to do that, and that's been something I've really enjoyed because I get to be more present, not just for the job, but for the people that are there. And I think that's been, for me, a very fruitful and rewarding place that I feel like God's really done a lot in me, but also used me to really care for other people. And I would not want to give something like that up so lightly and just make it seem like it's not of value. I think for me, that is really valuable. And I don't think that form of ministry is less valuable than like my church ministry. For me, they're kind of the same. And I don't know. I think to me, it's been something I've really enjoyed getting to be a part of and really investing in that part of the season of my life when I don't know if I'll always get to do that in the same way, but I'm enjoying that I can right now. So along these same lines, what are some of the temptations that you can struggle with as a single person? I know we've talked joys and sorrows, and maybe some of the sorrows that we've expressed do lead to some of the things that we're going to say now are more in the temptation zone, but what kinds of things would you guys say are temptations that you deal with? I can go first. I don't care. I think discouragement is probably the main thing that comes to mind when I think of a question like this. I already talked about community and that I think there's a lot of benefits to that and having people in your life. But if you don't always have somebody around, especially if you live alone, which in many cases for single people can be a common thing, when you are going through like the highs and lows of your life, and community is something that would be very beneficial for you, for that encouragement, that support, having someone kind of to lean into, be it for biblical truth, just to help you think something through, or just to deal with maybe even the emotional side of something. It can be very discouraging and more difficult to fight those battles alone, as I think it would be for everybody. But I think as a single person, there's a sense of you kind of feeling that aloneness a little bit more, and you have more of those alone moments than you would if you were in a different season. So I think discouragement can much more easily set in across a wide range of things that happen in your life. Maybe you had a bad day that day and you're already struggling with something random, and it doesn't even have to do with being single. It's just like the life stuff. And because no one is there to kind of come into that moment with you, or maybe you have friends, but you're not sure if you have the kind of relationships and connections where you could lean on somebody in that moment. I mean, as a single person, if I'm having a bad day, I don't always have somebody where I go, I could interrupt their day with this. Like, they would be there for this one, because I'm thinking they got kids, they're doing stuff, they're at work, and it's nice to have those places. But if you don't, and I think a lot of people probably don't have that, it's easy to kind of spiral, and you can't always catch yourself. I think that's what people can be really beneficial for in your walk, that they're there to help you kind of get out of your head and sort through your heart and figure all that stuff out. And I think discouragement can be, things can spiral, any range of topics. It can just kind of go downhill, and you don't always know that you're there, or you're not always capable of pulling yourself out by yourself. And I think community is helpful for that, but just discouragement. I think there is also discouragement sometimes that you are single. If that's something that you don't want, I think you can have all kinds of doubtful thoughts and questions that creep in, like, is something wrong with me? This is not working out. Like, everyone else seems to be doing all right. And just the kind of running narrative of wondering if you're missing something, or missing out on something. I don't know that in my right frame of mind I agree that you are, because I don't know that there's a better season of life. I don't think marriage is leveling up to level 2 somehow in the Christian circle, but I think you can wonder at times if you're missing something. You were talking about the grass being greener.
Well, and I do think that many singles can idolize marriage.
Yeah.
To the point where, and because you're struggling with different things. Mm-hmm. It can be loneliness, and you think that married people are never lonely. Yeah. Hang around with some married people, you'll find out that's not true.
Give it time.
That they experience loneliness too.
Yeah. But it never looks
and-
like it. Half the time on the outside, it doesn't look like it. You have to that's where community and relationships sets in for you to see that. But
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, and so I think, there is that temptation to idolize marriage, to think that when you get there, then all the things you struggle with now go away. And they don't.
Yeah.
They're just packaged in a different package, but they're still there.
Yeah.
And so if you're struggling with, again, I'm blanking on what you might be struggling with, but those struggles, loneliness.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with loneliness and you're not turning that loneliness towards the Lord, finding Him to be a sufficiency for you, if you think somebody, a human being, is going to be for you more than what the Lord can be for you, you're going to be disappointed. They can maybe be a stopgap measure for a time, but ultimately you will come to the point where you realize they don't meet that loneliness either.
Yeah.
And so, again, for me, one of the ways that I would have idolized marriage in the past, though I think God has opened up my eyes about this, is that somehow I would have greater security if I were married, because then, my husband would be the backup financial provider. It wouldn't be on me to take care of me alone. I would have somebody to be able to trust to help with that, or, if my car broke down, there'd be somebody who could, there's probably another car that my husband would own.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that that's not my place of security. Again, if I'm struggling financially, my husband's probably struggling financially.
Yeah.
If my car's broken down, my husband's car probably isn't so much better than mine.
Yeah.
And so he's not my source of security. God is my source of security.
Yeah.
And so when I put my eyes in that and I trust in that, then I'm gonna find real joy for what I want.
Yeah.
But if I think I'm going to find it in marriage, there are good things to find in marriage, but they don't solve your issues.
Everything doesn't just disappear. And I will
Doesn't solve your
say,
issues.
to clarify something I said and piggyback on what you're saying, I don't think feeling lonely is bad or wrong. I don't think that means you're automatically in a bad place or in a bad way if you're experiencing that. I think that's normal, and I think it would make sense. I think loneliness is just an expression of kind of how you're feeling at that time. I think it's closer probably to what you're talking about, where it's, well, what happens next? If you're lonely because you are really putting all of your confidence and dependence upon another person to make you happy or not lonely, or just anything that feels fuller than what you are right now, and you're not ultimately going back to God, realizing that even you can bring that loneliness to Him, and maybe He understands that better than you think He does, that if it's not wrong, that He can be enough for you as you go through that, instead of trying to just remove it from you. I think that's fine. I don't know that I think that's a bad thing. I think it's when you're doing what you're talking about, where you're putting all that confidence and you're depending on somebody else to make you whole. I think that's where it becomes something that's probably not healthy and can be dangerous for that next season. Because those feelings, we all go through different emotional roller coasters, I think, regardless of our season. And I think it's really about what you do with a lot of that stuff than it is about trying to make sure it doesn't happen. I don't think it's bad to go through all of that. I don't think it means you're failing somehow. But yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, apart from the relational aspects of loneliness or temptations you might face that way, I think one of the biggest temptations for me or single people I've known, especially if they're single beyond their 20s into their 30s or beyond, is the temptation to put your life on hold. That you're not going to do something because you're waiting to be complete with another person that hasn't come along yet. So things like my decisions to buy a house, or to pursue my master's degree, or to take on a leadership position in my church or with Campus Crusade, to go on several mission trips. And many listening to temptation was, what if I meet someone or I haven't met someone yet? And what if they don't like this house? Or what if I'm in the wrong part of the world when they're here and I miss them? And it's just a temptation. I think you should treat your life as if, like a married person, you make the same plans that you would do to further your career, your ministry, your growth in Christ, whatever your plans are for the future.
Yeah, I agreed.
Yeah, I think, whether you're younger or maybe you're widower or whatever, I think that I mentioned earlier, the church can't be that source of intimacy.
Yeah.
You're not gonna, they can't be that to you.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about, death of vision or something like that, or just like how Lord, how are you going to be my satisfaction, in this area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a big jump, from maybe just thinking about comfort or something like that.
Yeah.
So the reality is we live in a world not only, all around us that is just very, very much saturated with temptations and allurements and it's just I think it's for a single that is a challenge, that is a significant challenge. It doesn't mean that married people aren't tested and tempted themselves, but I think that that it's not as clear how you navigate that other than trust God, and believe He is sufficient and so forth in this areas.
Yeah, and bringing in the cultural perspective, I think we live in a culture that really communicates that you're not whole if you're single, which can lead to, I feel like, every kind of temptation. It's a frustrating lie, I think, if you accept that you're somehow not complete. Like, if you just believe that you're walking around, like, with a hole in you, it's hard to be happy, I think, if you accept that mentality. Like, everything just feels like something's missing. And I don't know that it is. I just think you're looking for something probably to put in that space that isn't meant to fill it, and it's probably why you're feeling some sort of way about it. But culturally, I think that can be extremely difficult. Our culture, it's funny because we have so many singles. Like, as a country, I feel like we have so many singles at this time, probably more than I think we've ever had, because in a lot of cases in a lot of different states, people just aren't getting married. So it's interesting that yet we, like, if you look at movies, media in general, it's all selling the concept that you need to find, like, what's missing from you that completes you. And I just think that can make you...
And even if you don't find what's missing, as long as you have someone.
Yeah. Somebody.
You're better than being alone.
Yes, that somehow that's better. And I think that's a lie. I just think it can be very tempting. I think not because you consciously sit there and think, I'm going to agree with this. I think that's the kind of mentality. It just slowly sinks in and you don't realize you're thinking that way. And then you just kind of feel a little and you don't really realize that that's probably why you feel all But yeah, other thoughts on temptations and stuff before we move on? Anybody? No? Okay. So now that we've gone through all of the temptations and the struggles and the joys and the sorrows, so what does Christ-centered singleness look like to you guys? What would be your view on that?
It's probably in many ways the same thing that a married person would do in terms of putting in your life healthy practices and support with relationships and make choices that would make you stronger in your faith and personally and emotionally. And for a single person, you just don't have a spouse or a family or children immediately there to do it with, but you still need those people in your life to interact with and have as support to turn to, or people that can turn to you. So I think it's putting in place healthy practices that become a lifelong discipline.
It's good.
Yeah, this is like I said, this is kind of new for me to think about single applications of some of these things. And to me, the default of how I live out my Christian life was, first of all, if you're not talking about your work environment, you're thinking your family, you're thinking immediately all your applications are family oriented. And I think the kind of the exciting thing or the neat thing about this is, like, I think about Jesus, he's single, he's going around and God just brings people to him all the time. And so I'm just like thinking, well, how can I be like Christ in this situation? What would he want me to, what would he do? Which is really different, I think, than it isn't, but it's kind of different than when it's like, we need to get the kids up, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. I'm not thinking about those kinds of things anymore. I'm just thinking about, wow, is that a divine appointment? This person just came up to me and started talking to me. Do I, how would I respond to this? So it's a little bit more dynamic.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more, like I said, I'm not as hindered by the clock and, other things. So I'm trying to, for me, I'm thinking about, Lord, I want to walk with you in this adventure now. And I want to be what you would want me to be in those situations, which is really kind of an exciting piece. And again, I'm only 7 months into this, so
yeah.
I understand.
We got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just really kind of want to echo what Charlie said earlier about not putting your life on hold. Christ-like singleness, I think, is just a pursuit of what Christ is about around you and in you. How has he gifted you? How has he opened opportunities for you? What are the good works that he's prepared for you? Are you aware of those things? Or are you just waiting for that to happen so you can do your good works? No, God has good works now. And, he wants you to be about those things. He's gifted you. He's given, different avenues for you to be able to use those things. And, it's pursuing him in the midst of wherever you're at.
Yeah.
And so, again, not putting your life on hold, but being about what he calls you to.
Yeah, I think that's good. When I think about this question, because I was trying to figure out, I'm like, what do I think this looks like? The only thing that really stands out to me is I know as a single person, we're up here talking about how much time and flexibility and really I don't want to say you're accountable to no one, but you don't have the same ties of accountability that other people in other situations do. But I think what would be a really God-honoring, Christ-like balance in how much you can make your world about you, but then choose not to completely make your whole life about you. If I'm saying that in a way that makes sense. I think you, as a single person, there is a lot of opportunity for you to center your entire existence around yourself and what you think and what you want and what you want to do. And that freedom becomes something that kind of consumes you into a selfish state where it's just you doing what you want all the time, and you don't have to think about anybody else, and maybe you don't want to think about anybody else, and you're free to do that, and you can enter into that, and in many cases, there would be nobody that would challenge you on that. You would be free to go about your life and do what you're going to do, but I think when we look at the life of Christ, he was not married, at least not that we have in Scripture, so I'm assuming that he wasn't. He really lived a life that was not centered around himself. It was very sacrificial. And I think it can be challenging to do that because I think it's easier to be self-absorbed when there aren't things that keep kind of pulling you to think of other people. But I think that's what keeps coming to mind, that that sliding scale. I don't think it's wrong to consider yourself. I'm not saying never do what you want to do because you need to think of everybody else. I don't feel that way. I think you should consider what you want to do, and I think you're freer to do that in this season. I just don't think you're completely free to disregard all the other people that are out there in your world and in your life just because you're single. So being able to consider yourself but still choosing to be selfless, I think, in how you make some of your choices. Maybe you do have free time on that Friday night and you could just sit by yourself and do whatever it is you want to do, but maybe there is an opportunity to care for somebody else or do something or go somewhere and support somebody. Maybe it feels like work, even if it maybe could be fun and you're thinking, I don't want to do it. But thinking of how that might be good for other people in that moment, I think is something that's still worth considering.
And just even to harken back to the temptations question, that to me is another temptation of singleness, is to be self-centered and selfish at times. And again, that's often when you're not pursuing Christ-likeness. But that is a temptation to be very much I like what I like, I do what I do, and I don't have to force myself to do any of these things. And while that's true, God may be calling you to do those things, even though it wouldn't be something you would choose for yourself.
Yeah.
And so you need to be willing.
Yeah.
You know, it is about his glory, not your own.
Yeah.
And so, so that would be another temptation to harken back to that question.
Yeah, and especially if you are someone who's single who one day you would like to be married, I think it would be particularly beneficial to you to not, lean too hard into the selfishness bit, because you are going to be challenged, I think, for the rest of your life to consider other people and their well-being for the good of the gospel, regardless of your season. But I think marriages and families, having kids, those specific commitments particularly press on those things because they are part of the direct connections that you're called to once you're in those seasons. So you're really it's not just that you'll wrestle with it, you're really accountable for it in specific people's lives at that point. If you haven't practiced, I feel like that would just be really difficult to go from, I don't have to care about anybody but me and I'm enjoying it and that's okay, to now I need to really consciously consider other people. I don't think that it will be a jump. I'm sure that will still be a transition that you would make. But if it's gut-wrenching, I feel like maybe you weren't thinking fully of other people all the way when you were by yourself. And maybe, I think as a Christ-like single, I would think that would be something you would want to consider, especially if that's where you want to take your life, if you would like to see it go that direction. I think it would benefit you to do that and practice that now instead of waiting until you're married to decide that you have to think about other people. I think that's a little risky, but maybe that's just me. So when Paul commends singleness as undivided devotion, how do you think about that verse and the way that it impacts your life?
I think about it a lot right now. I do. And I think I thought about it. I've been thinking about it. I think this season of life here that I'm in, I've thought a lot about how people finish their lives and how after you've had a lot of your life, you kind of see where pursuits lead or don't lead, or how they don't satisfy and so forth. So I think that you can come to this season of life and still kind of be banking on whatever retirement or something like that and think, now I'm really going to have fun, or now I'm going to really relax, or now I'm going to do all the things I want to do. And I think having thought about that a lot before I even got to this season, and I think a lot of people will get to this same place that I'm in now.
For sure.
I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to buy into that. I'm not going to buy into that those things are really going to satisfy me. And so I've had enough of fun in my life, in a sense. I'm still going to have fun, I know that. But I've chased enough things that I know that they can't satisfy me, that I think I've already pretty well determined that when I get to this season, that I'm going to try and replace all those freer moments with things that really will count more. And even if I don't have in my palette of hunger, wouldn't normally be thinking, wow, I need more time in the Word, I need more time with God, and more worship, more whatever. I'm choosing that, and that's why I think I am in a better place. And I think God has met me in my sorrows, and met me in my longings, and met me in my situation. And I think I'm grateful. I really am grateful for this season, because I've lived with people, lived in households where spouses are trying to find 15 minutes to get with God, or 10 minutes to get with God, and I don't have that at all. I can get hours. I can get hours with God. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever had that opportunity, So I think that I'm trying to press into that. And again, I know I'm in the early stages of it, but I would encourage and challenge those who will get to that situation, not to buy into using the last years of your life, to just indulge yourself, because I just think that I do have opportunity, and that whether it was when I became an empty nester to retirement kind of an ages that comes, I think it's the time to really press into God and enjoy God, and experience God in ways that you didn't have you were distracted from. So
that's good. Yeah, I think in my mind, I'm thinking like a lot of what life, I think, especially for the believer, is really about. Because I've wondered at times, like, once you're saved, I'm like, what are we doing down here? Like, you could say, like, we're just being witnesses and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, that's all true. But there's so much more, I think, that goes on, you know, in your life. And I think one of the main things that life is about is it's your opportunity to experience and get to know God prior to going to be with him for the rest of eternity. And I think the way that you walk that out and get to know him, that relationship is really what your existence is really about. That's what you're doing down here. And so when I think of like undivided devotion, I'm thinking, well, it's really another way to describe the less distraction for that goal, I think, is the way that I'm thinking of it. And I think there's something that's really beautiful and beneficial about that. A lot of people really, unfortunately, don't get to value because they're not willing to look at life that way. I think they're looking for other things to make life be what it's supposed to be or what it's about. And I think when you realize it's really about cultivating that relationship, and that's the journey of your life from start to finish, is about the journey that he takes you on in getting to know him better, bit by bit, day by day, as he takes you through the story that's yours. You get to go through that and focus on that more so than if you had other things that you're committed to as you go through part of your story. And those are good things, but to say that they are not distracting, I think the Bible also talks about like the divisions of your heart a little bit, that it can be where those commitments are also somewhat distracting to you because you have a love for things that are also in this world, which are good things, but you also don't want to lose sight of your love of your Savior, ultimately. And trying to balance loves can be challenging. So the undivided devotion bit is really the opportunity to sink into that without those being a part of your story, at least at the time that you're going through this. And I don't know, I think it's undervalued, unfortunately, I think, by way too many people, that maybe we've bought into the lie that our lives are supposed to be full or more about something else. And by focusing on that, I think there really is a fullness that you get to experience in that.
This is one of the things that I wish was more taught about in singles kind of conferences and singles times. Because, yes, you get teachings about undivided devotion, but I don't know that I've ever felt like they've gone deep enough. And so, you know, I've thought about this a lot through the years, and it's really only, you know, maybe the past 5 years that I felt like the Lord kind of showed me a different light on the story of Mary and Martha. So Martha's running around and she's got many things that she's concerned about, and Mary's just sitting at the feet of Jesus. And I feel like the Lord really showed me, like, Becky, that's the difference of being married and being single. You know, Martha is the married woman. She was not married, but in her actions, she's like a married woman who has to be concerned about many things. You know, her children need to eat. You know, a married woman, you know, has many things to be concerned about. The single woman can sit at Jesus' feet. And what a privilege and an honor to have a life where you're able to do that. That's a blessing. And if that's your whole life, then you've gotten the better part. Really. That's what Scripture, you know, that story, you know, kind of points out is Mary got the better part. She got what was necessary. It wasn't going to be taken from her. And so really having a life that you can really be undivided in your attention and your devotion to the Lord is, according to Paul, the better life.
You get to hold that eternal perspective a little bit more.
And I think in a singles life, you know, again, that's not held out enough. The preciousness of that, the preciousness that you get to have quiet times. You don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before your children. And you can spend hours if you'd like. And you can do whatever you want during that time with the Lord and not have a little one question you, why are you singing right now,
Yeah.
Mommy? Or, you know,
Yeah.
so you really have that privilege, and it is a real privilege and joy to be able to experience that and do that.
Yeah, it's good.
I think the choices, I think you don't have the responsibility of a spouse and children. Then you have to choose, what will I pour that energy into?
Right.
And I could find lots of substitutes, spouses and children and other responsibilities and times or things that just waste my energy at. And it's really, I think, again, a discipline to make the right choices, to say, how do I pour myself into God and knowing him better, learning about his word and people and relationships, the things that are eternal, that do last forever.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, Jesus himself as a single man really was able to pour himself into the lives of other men around him, and those other men went out and changed the world, you know, because of what he did.
Yeah.
Obviously, more even beyond that, but that his singleness enabled him to travel and with these men and pour his life into teaching them.
Yeah, that's good. You're good to say something?
And sometimes he had to get up really early.
And sometimes I do too, but.
Yeah.
But that is one of the joys of singleness, is you don't often have to get up quite as early as...
Yes, for sure. All right, so last question. If there was one thing that you as a single person would want to communicate to the church body or the Christian community as a whole, what would you want to say to them? What would you want them to know or hear from you? Let everybody get a chance to do this one. I know it's a tough question. There's a lot you could say, but
Well, I want to, I just want to thank the friends that have, kind of continued with me. I didn't know, how things might change when I got into a single state, and if they would feel weird, and their spouses wouldn't want to be around, or whatever. It's just like, I don't know what to say to him since his wife's not here or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful for guys who are still my friends, and they hang out with me, and they don't even tell me they're coming to hang out. They just come and do it, and so I just really appreciate, that they didn't let my single situation stop the friendship. And so I really want to thank them for that.
it's good.
I think for me, don't feel sorry for me.
Do not pity Becky. She's doing great.
I don't feel sorry for me. Don't feel sorry for me. And while I long still to be married and for God to bless me with children in some way, I do not feel like I have a lesser life. So don't feel sorry for me. I feel like in a very real ways, I have a very rich life, and I have the life that God has chosen to bless and use me in. And I feel blessed and used by him in it.
It's good.
I guess for myself, advice I'd give to other singles, I guess for marrieds too, because it hasn't changed since I got married, is to have people in your life besides a spouse or a child. But if something were to happen to you, if you were to get off track or make a mistake or to disappear, that someone would notice. You're not a secret person that has that's not going to have parts of your life that are invisible to people that know you really well. So make sure you're connected to people that if something happened to you, they'd come after you and say, Charlie, where are you?
Yeah.
You need help? I'm here to help you. So don't be anonymous.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think if I could pick one thing, it's hard to pick one thing. This is the hard question. If you, I'm like, I got to boil it down to one thing I want someone to know. I think it would have to be that for church communities and church bodies, thinking about how you're going to deal with your single people that are in your life, question if you really actually care about them. And if the answer to that is yes, my question is, how do you show that, and do they know? Because I think if you just say that flippantly, but there is no expression of that in the way that you go about living your life, I would question if that's truly where you're at. It's easy to say, yeah, I care, I support them, I'm there for them. But if your life really doesn't reflect an openness to the care for them and the concern for them that you're saying you have, I wonder if that's really that helpful and that healthy. And we would notice that. I would just say, I think single people notice that kind of thing. That people can talk a really good game about how much they care and how important that can be to them, but then their life may not reflect that at all. They may not make time for any of the single people. They may not invest or even check on you. They might not be seeing how you're doing. They may not even be really concerned about making sure that there is ministry and church-related stuff that really brings you in and welcomes you, as much as they are for things like children's ministry or marriage retreats or men's or women's ministry. And I think while some of those, I mean, men's and women's ministry obviously can still cover for single people. You don't have to be married to do those. But, I mean, how much does your life really reflect what you say you care about with this? I think when things are valuable to you, something in your life, time, money, attention, something, should reflect that. And if you're going to say you care, I guess my challenge is put your money where your mouth is, or your time, or your attention, and I mean, check on the people that are single, invest in somebody's life, decide that they're more than just a random single person floating around out there, and see what's really going on with them. Trust me, we are more dynamic than just saying we're single. Like, we have more to say than that, and I think there's more life we're living than that. But if you are not interested in it, I mean, we're probably going to pick that up. So if you are, you should probably work to find a way to communicate that. And I think that would be helpful for everybody. Maybe you would learn something. I know we're not married, some of us don't have kids, but like, we do still know things. I think we can still be helpful to people's lives.
And that's another thing. I'd love married people to know that I can give counsel to
Yeah.
to you as a married person.
Mm-hmm.
I may not know all the ins and outs of marriage, but I understand the sinful heart. I understand how difficult it can be to trust God in the midst of hard issues, difficult things, and I can give you counsel in the midst of that too.
Yeah, and just make time. I think, if you want to invest in us, I'm not saying it's going to be the same kind of investment that we could have maybe to pour into you if you're not single, because it probably won't be, and that's okay. But I think small spaces and leaving that open and letting people know that you want those people in that season to fill that space, I think would be really helpful, hopefully, for everybody. But other thoughts before we close out? No? All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate all your insights, your different seasons of life, and all your experience with this. I hope that everybody who's watching found it as informative and helpful as I did. And for those of you out there, thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed our discussion today, or if you have other questions, comments, topics you want to suggest, then please feel free to send us an email at resources@gracecommunity.org and just mention the panel in the email title, because we would love to hear anything that you have to say about this conversation, or even things that we've already done or stuff we're going to do in the future. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time.